Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to talk about Idi Amin, and in particular, my skepticism about the stories that are told about him. Now, Idi Amin is a person who many of us know about. We've heard stories about him. And he's a figure that is well known in Africa, and I'll say the rest of the world. Many movies have been made about him, documentaries, best-selling books have been written about him. So he's a well-known individual. But I have my own skepticism as to the stories that are told about him. And in this video, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to tell you why I'm a skeptic. And I'm also going to tell you what I think happened to Idi Amin. And I'm not saying that he didn't do some of the things that he's accused of doing. What I'm saying is that whatever he did to the people of Uganda is not the reason why his image is so ruined. Now, Idi Amin was born in 1928 in Uganda. His father was a Kakwa, an ethnic group that is found to the northwest of Uganda, and his mother was a Lugbara, another ethnic group in the same area. And it seems like Idi Amin did get some basic education. And then in 1946, he joined the King's African Rifles, KRR, which was basically a British Army section for Africans. And he joined the army as a cook. That's the information that is available. And then he rose through the ranks, and by the time Uganda is becoming independent in 1960, he was a high military officer. And then in 1971, he launched a coup, and then he removed Milton Obote from power, and he became the president of Uganda. Now, Idi Amin ruled Uganda from 1971 to 1979, when he also was chased away from Uganda by mostly Tanzanian army that came from the south and captured Kampala. Then Idi Amin escaped Saudi Arabia, where he lived for the rest of his life until his passing in the year 2003. Now, let me explain where my skepticism comes from regarding what Idi Amin did and why I think the image we have about him is to a large extent manufactured for some reason. Number one, Idi Amin ruled in the era when media was actually gatekept. Like, people would listen to and watch and read what the overlords decided they were going to consume. That's how it was controlled. It's not like now, even though even now there is control over the content that we consume, but it's not the way it was before the internet, because before the internet, in most countries, there were very few channels of communication, and those channels were mostly controlled by the government or by very powerful people. So Idi Amin comes from that era, so we have to bear that in mind. The more I've studied PR or public relations, or let's call it propaganda, the more my eyes have opened to many possibilities when it comes to events that we see happening around us, or in the political arena, or in the public discourse and things like that. And when you start realizing how PR works, then you can see how things can be shaped in a way that you cannot even imagine. There are a few things that stand out for me when the story of Idi Amin is told. Number one is this portrayal of him as a bumbling fool. That's a red flag for me, because bumbling fools don't rise to very high offices like Idi Amin did. So every time I see a politician or somebody who is in very high offices is portrayed as a bumbling fool, I'm always very skeptical, because there's something else going on there, because bumbling fools don't rise up to very high offices, especially when they did not inherit that office. Like, they were not born into a family like royalty, and then they were told, oh, now you are the king. This is a person who came from the bottom, and then they rose up through the ranks to go to the top of the military. And in fact, by the time Uganda is becoming independent, he was a lieutenant, I think. And then after independence, seems like the first presidents, I would say Milton Obote in particular, and the King of Buganda, who shortly performed the functions of the head of state, saw him as somebody who was very highly skilled, and that's why they had him around, and in fact they promoted him. Them promoting him says something about the guy. So there's no way this guy was a bumbling fool. There's no way. You cannot persuade me. So that's a red flag for me when this guy is portrayed as a bumbling fool who did not understand how things work, who was so ignorant about so many things. That's a red flag for me, because going by where he came from and where he reached, it tells me he wasn't a bumbling fool. So that's a red flag for me. Now, another red flag for me regarding the stories that are told about Idi Amin is how over the top the stories are. Like, you know, the stories of parts of, let's say, humans being found in the fridge in his kitchen. That's over the top. And I'm thinking, even if he used to do that, that's quite over the top. You would agree if you think about it carefully. That's either he's insane, which, going by where he came from and where he reached, that's not even possible that he was that insane. So that's over the top story. And when a story is over the top, I tend to be very skeptical about it. So that's one of them. Him consuming flesh, of course, that humans should not consume. Him doing so many things that are told that are over the top, like him going to a public event and just speaking a woman like that with everybody seeing. Those are very over the top stories that make me very skeptical. And again, I invite you to remember what I said when I started this video, that these things are coming from an era when content was really controlled. So bear that in mind. Now, another red flag for me is the extreme extent that the global establishment went into portraying this guy in the most negative way possible. That's a red flag for me, and I'm going to explain why it's a red flag. There are blockbuster movies, maybe 2 or 3. There are documentaries about this guy, and these are not local documentaries in Uganda or movies in East Africa. These are Hollywood productions about Idi Amin, and best-selling books. Several of them are have been published about Idi Amin, and these are bestsellers. But now, when you look at what makes Idi Amin to be this character that his story has to be told in blockbuster movies and best-selling books in the West, is things that very many other African leaders did. For example, I think Francisco Macías Nguema, who was the first president of Equatorial Guinea, did a lot more. Like, he did way worse than what Idi Amin is accused to have done in Uganda. But there's no blockbuster movie about Macías Nguema. Nobody cares about him. Nobody cares. So the Western mainstream or the Western establishment didn't tell these stories about Idi Amin because they cared so much about what Idi Amin did to Ugandans. No, they didn't, because if that was the case, there were so many other African leaders who did terrible things, and their stories would have been told. In fact, some of them did a lot more than what Idi Amin is accused of. And I've given an example of Francisco Macías Nguema, who in fact, he said he went crazy while still being president, and he was doing things including closing down the central bank and having all the money and everything of the state moved to his rural home. Like, he did such crazy things. You'll think that's an interesting story to be made into a blockbuster movie, but no, we don't have that. So why Idi Amin and not Macías Nguema or many of the other African dictators who did very terrible things in their countries? Now, what actually happened to Idi Amin? If you ask me, I'll tell you that Idi Amin crossed very powerful people in the world. I think that's what happened. It's not that he killed Ugandans or he was corrupt or things like that. I don't think that's what made Idi Amin a target of all this smearing campaign. I think what attracted that smearing campaign to the extent of blockbuster movies, documentaries, and books, and then every village you go to, everybody has this very negative image of this man, is that he crossed some very powerful people in the world. And after crossing them, they decided he needed to get out of power, but that wasn't enough. They decided that it was better to assassinate his character, to make him stink so much that even dogs will run away from him because of the stink that comes from him. I think that's what happened. And I think even more than just punishing him for crossing some very powerful people in the world, I think they decided to use him as an example. Like, all these things were done not really to punish him yet. Punish him, he was already out of office, he's in Saudi Arabia somewhere. But they decide they need to use him as an example to other African leaders and to some extent leaders from other third world countries. And they do all this to smear him and to assassinate his character completely, so that other leaders will see that and be like, no, thank you, I'm not going to cross you people. I'm going to do whatever you people want. I think he was just used as an example. Now, again, I'm not saying that Idi Amin didn't do some terrible things. maybe he did kill some Ugandans. That's highly possible. I'm not saying he didn't. He was corrupt. That's highly possible. But what I'm saying, those are not the things that made his image to be tarnished the way it has been done, because those things were kind of like standard in the 60s and 70s across Africa. If those were the actual reasons, we should have more people that we think of, like we think of Idi Amin. We should be talking about Macías Nguema of Equatorial Guinea the way we talk about Idi Amin. We should be talking about so many people. We should be talking about Mengistu Haile Mariam. We should have blockbuster movies about Mengistu Haile Mariam of Ethiopia. We should have that. But that was not the reason why. The reason I think Idi Amin ended up being tarnished the way he has been tarnished is not because of what he did to the people of Uganda or Africans. Is him crossing some very powerful people, and he was punished for it. And the punishment was also used as an example, like, look at what we did to this guy. Don't try that. Those are my random thoughts.